And so we have to kind of go through like a systematic process. So the first thing I always tell people to do is check your professional liability insurance. Make sure that your insurance policy covers you to practice internationally.
Hi, I'm Kim Tolson and I'm the traveling therapist. It's my passion to teach therapists how to navigate online private practices and multiple income streams so they can travel the world. I'm a digital nomad with a virtual insurance-based private therapy practice and a multi-six-figure coaching business. I'm obsessed with entrepreneurship and developing tools that can help therapists live an adventurous lifestyle. In this podcast, I will discuss my journey as a digital nomad. I'll chat with other traveling therapists and help you navigate the complexities of running an online insurance-based practice. I'm so glad to have you with me on this journey. Welcome everybody to another episode of the Traveling Therapist Podcast. I'm here with Tamara Howell and I'm so excited to have her here. She is a traveling therapist, but she also specializes in helping therapists learn to travel in the UK and navigate all of the, what would you say, intricacies that go along with traveling in the UK and working as an American therapist, but also therapists in the UK that are trying to figure out how to do that. So she agreed to come today and talk a little bit about this. And she's also going to be a contributor with the Traveling Therapist course that should be out in early spring, I'm hoping. So Tamara, thank you so much for being here. And I'd love if you would start out by just letting everybody know, like, how did you go from being just your typical therapist to a traveling therapist?
Thank you so much. First of all, thank you for inviting me. It's so lovely. I really love to connect with people that I'm connected with online, in Facebook and groups, and it's just really wonderful to spend time together. And thanks so much for inviting me.
Welcome.
And my cat Chili is also with us today, so you might see him pop up from time to time. So I trained in London. I became a therapist in London, and then I moved to Paris to be with my then boyfriend, who's now my husband. So I moved my practice from the UK to Paris. And then since then, we've lived in another couple of countries. We've moved to Tel Aviv, to Copenhagen, back to Paris, and then back to London. Some of that has been in person and some of that has been online. Some has been hybrid. And now I've been completely online for a few years. So that's kind of how it happened. Yeah.
That is amazing. Oh my gosh. So I bet you have so many like tips and tricks just around like navigating the different countries and moving your practice. Like I just wonder what that was like having to which countries. Like how did that process go for you?
Yeah, I mean, culturally, it was a really big difference for me, not just because France is very different to the UK, but also culturally, the professional community was very different as well. It's much smaller in France, English-speaking therapists, it's much smaller. And I actually found some really lovely therapists who helped me get set up. And I've always been so grateful for this, because if I hadn't come across them, I don't know that I would have known who to speak to or how to build my practice. But when I first got to Paris, I didn't work for a bit. I kind of got the lay of the land and settled in and then I wrote letters back then, snail mail, not emails. I looked people up on directories. I sent them letters with like my logo and my letter heading and an introduction and said that I'd really love to go and meet them and hear about their practices, who I could send to them, who they'd like to see in their practices. And I think I wrote to about 100 people.
Wow.
And so psychiatrists, doctors, other therapists, and I was looking specifically for people who were working with English-speaking clients. And about 20 of them got back to me.
Wow.
At the time, actually, over time, others got in touch with me. But at the time about 20 got in touch with me, and I staggered it as well. So I kept a spreadsheet of who I'd contacted and when I'd followed up and things like this. And then I staggered it as well. So I would send out 5, and then I would send out 10, and then I would send out 5. And then I went in and I met those, however many it was, 18 or 20. And a couple of them really like helped me. Like one of them went through my list and was like, yes, you need to get in touch with that person. Yes, this person can send you referrals. This is how you get on insurance panels. This is how you set up your business. This is an accountant, you know. So just getting in contact and learning about the culture of the professional landscape when we move is so important. And that it's taught me so much, you know, that we can a lot of the time get the information just from people who are already there.
Mm-hmm. That's so important, because I think that's what stops a lot of therapists from traveling. You know, it's like, gosh, you know, what if I go to, you know, Ireland and I have no idea how to navigate the system and it just seems so overwhelming? People just don't do it, you know, and that's part of the goal of this podcast too, and the traveling therapist course, is to help make it easy for people to be able to do it, because, you know, I love the traveling lifestyle, like I'm obsessed with it. And it sounds like you really love that too, like going different places, exploring different cultures. You know, and if we didn't have these people to guide us, I don't think many of us would do it.
Absolutely. Yeah. I think, and you know, I also try to be helpful in the places where I am. So, you know, if there's a question about working in the UK on Facebook, I'm, you know, someone will tag me, or I'll jump in. I'll be like, I'm in the UK. Hi, you know. Or if it's about France, I'm a little bit less up to date with France because I haven't lived in France for a while, but I'm, you know, still know kind of where to look things up. And just, I think also really knowing how to Google. I know that sounds really simple, but just knowing like what words to put in when we Google.
Yes.
Are really important. And I think a lot of the time people ask, like, can we practice internationally? And it's not so much can we, but how can we do it ethically and safely, you know?
Absolutely. Yeah. So important. So it sounds like back then when you started traveling, you were, you know, like literally moving to a new country and starting up with a whole new set of clients as you were doing that. So how do you navigate it now? Are you able to just take your clients that you have in the UK and, like, let's say if you moved to Tel Aviv or France or somewhere, like, how does that work now going from country to country?
Yeah, that's so true. I had a little practice in London. I'd been working in addiction treatment centers, and then I'd started a little practice. So I kept a couple of clients and kind of worked. Actually, I worked on telephone back then because I was like, I wasn't really that keen on telephone and internet, like online therapy. I hadn't really done any proper training yet. So I hadn't really like got into it. I hadn't really understood the benefits and the depth of connection that's available in online therapy. And so that's why I started an in-person practice. So I found an office. Actually, I think I found a couple of offices and settled in one eventually, found a little kind of group of people. And then when I moved back online. So I did some training and then I moved back online. And then since then, I've always kind of stayed online because I love it so much now. And so I haven't had to kind of start again. And in fact, like when I lived in Tel Aviv, I didn't have any clients there. I just had clients who were in France or in the UK. When I was in Denmark or in, you know, it's not necessarily like limited to the place where I am anymore, you know? So I think I spent a lot of this year in France because of travel restrictions, but now my practice is a little bit different anyway, because I tend to work with people for a few years. Whereas back then, 10, 12 years ago, when I first moved, I was working with people for about 6 months at a time. So now, because there's much more kind of longevity to the work that I'm doing, they tend to stay with me wherever I am.
Gotcha. Wow. That's wonderful. So what are the regulations, like from, let's say if you were in the UK, you wanted to go live in Paris for a while, how does one navigate that? And is it different if you're, you know, a resident of the UK versus like an American therapist that's come over? That might be a huge question, but I wonder if you could just kind of touch on that a little bit to help people understand how that process works.
So I think what I'm going to do is make a big training video for you to put in your course on that.
Okay, yes. I'm looking forward to that.
In a nutshell, when we or our clients move locations, we have to go through like a sort of checklist. You can create a checklist for yourself, or I've got one, or you can just have an internal mental one if you want. But we have to go through several stages to make sure that we are fulfilling professional regulations, legal regulations in all locations. So we have to meet the regulations in the location where we are, and the location of the client, and where you're licensed, which could be different because, of course, you could be in Spain, your client could be in Italy, and you could be licensed in, I don't know, New York, right?
Right.
So you would have to meet all of those professional regulations.
Wow.
So, if you have to comply with HIPAA, then you still have to comply with HIPAA. If your clients are in Europe, then you have to comply with General Data Protection Regulation, which is the privacy law that's applicable to Europe and currently the UK. And so we have to kind of go through like a systematic process. So the first thing I always tell people to do is check your professional liability insurance. Make sure that your insurance policy covers you to practice internationally. There's some nuance to that. We have to ask specifically for the situation. If you ask an insurance policy, provider, do you cover international therapy? They may not know exactly what you mean. So you have to say where I'm in the US and someone else is in Europe, or where I'm in Europe and the client is still in the same place where I'm licensed. So read the fine print and check with the insurance policy.
Okay.
Then,
good tip.
I mean, that's just like the very first. It's not foolproof though. So for example, my insurance policy in the UK allows me apparently to work with clients in the US.
Wow.
But
really?
I'm not licensed in the US. So legally,
that's so
I can't
interesting.
work with clients in the US. But if you came to the UK, you could have my insurance policy, and that would cover you to work with your clients who are in the US in the state where you're licensed.
Wow. That's so interesting. I did not know that.
Yeah.
Wow.
So insurance companies don't always know everything. That's important. To know. So we have to comply with what they say, but then sometimes there are tighter regulations. So then we have to know about privacy law. So if you practice in the US, you have to know about HIPAA. If you practice in the UK or in Europe, you have to know about GDPR. In different countries, it's different. Some countries don't really have any. And then professional requirements. So something that people always get like very excited about is that the UK isn't regulated for counselors and psychotherapists.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
It is regulated for clinical psychologists, but it isn't for counselors and psychotherapists. And there is some freedom in that. There is some flexibility in that, because it means that you can practice with your clients that come to the UK. But of course, there's a little more risk because it means no one's really protecting you. So there is some kind of nuance to those sorts of things. So knowing what the professional regulations are. And then there's like, business things that we need to know as well. If you move country, then you pay tax in the country that you're based in.
Oh, right.
Even if your clients are still in the US and you're being paid dollars in the US.
Wow.
If you move to France, you pay tax in France. I think as an American, you also pay US tax as well.
I was going to say, I think you'd still have to pay. Yeah. That's so interesting.
So I think there's a sort of a double taxation agreement or something, which I'm not 100% clear on, but also knowing what the tax regulations are. So for example, in France, it's if you spend more than 180 days, but that's not the only, this is very specific, that's not the only thing that would make you pay tax here. If your child went to school here, but you spent less time than 180 days, you could still be taxed in France because it would indicate that your center of life was in France. So so knowing about, like, if you're planning on going and spending 3 months in a country, if you're planning on going and spending 6 months in a country, just making sure that you have enough days somewhere else that you fulfill the requirements to be taxed in the way that you want to be taxed.
I keep hearing this 6-month kind of rule with different countries. It seems to be like the magic number for when you like have to like switch over to visas and taxes and all of this stuff. Yeah. So how would you even find that out? Like is it different in each country who you would even talk to about this stuff? Or she's giving me the look, y'all, like it's so complicated.
Well, it's not super complicated. It sort of depends on the individual situation, right?
Okay.
So if you're splitting your time like I do between the UK and France, then, you would need to speak to a tax lawyer that understands both French and UK tax.
Wow.
If you're spending your time between the US and France, you would need to speak to a tax accountant or a tax lawyer that understands both of those. And the 180 days, the 6-month thing kind of works in many, many places. But for example, if you spend just under 6 months in one location, but in your home country, you're only there for 1 month because you spend 5 months in another location, then the one with 6 months is going to be the one that wins, and you have to pay tax. So you still have to make sure that you're maintaining the minimum number in the country where you're planning to be taxed.
Wow, that's so interesting. I'm so glad we have people like you, because you actually help therapists navigate this stuff and figure out exactly the best way to handle it depending on what country, and because you've navigated it so much yourself.
Yeah, I mean, I'd love to say that I know all the answers for all the countries, but I don't. Actually, mostly what I do is just support people with figuring out, how do I find this information? Like, who do I speak to about this? How do I make sure that I'm compliant? How do I make sure that I fulfill insurance, professional, ethical requirements, business, financial requirements, but also safety precautions? So helping people develop safety procedures so that we feel safe in our practices, and we can work internationally with people having taken care of our safety procedures and our paperwork as well. Like, I'm a big policies and procedures geek, and super into like paperwork and
well, you've created some paperwork, right, for therapists to navigate the GDPR. Is it GDPR?
It's GDPR, yeah.
Okay. I know nothing about it.
It's so much less intimidating than it's very much like common sense based. It's much less intimidating than it has a reputation for. And actually, there's a lot of things that are still being ironed out. It's not like, there are still lots of things kind of changing, but it's essentially just about how you collect, store, process, and destroy client data, what timeframes, giving them the information, being explicit about confidentiality, things like that.
So interesting. Yes. So if an American therapist wanted to come work in the UK, is there a way to take health insurance if you're doing that? Or do you have to be like a resident of the UK to be able to take health insurance of clients? Or does it even work like that over in the UK? So I know y'all have universal health care, but also private. You can buy private health care also, right? So I'm just curious how it works.
Yeah, so in the UK, we have the National Health Service, which is sort of, national institution, which means I can go and see my doctor for free, and I can get, it's not really free, obviously, because we pay, national insurance contributions. But anyway, essentially, everyone is entitled to healthcare. Therapy is very underfunded. So it's very hard, I think, in my experience, to get therapy on the NHS. And so the majority of people will pay privately. Some people have health insurance, but they tend to be people who are paying for private health insurance. So it might be people who work for a company have health insurance as part of their benefits. It might be people who travel internationally, have an international health insurance policy. It's not super common, actually.
Gotcha.
And even people who do have health insurance policies, they don't necessarily have therapy covered. And you usually have to jump through quite a few hoops. So you usually have to get a GP referral to a psychiatrist, and then a psychiatrist monitors your care and refers you to a psychotherapist. So there are some exceptions to that, obviously, but just generally speaking, insurance isn't the norm here. Yeah.
Wow. Okay. That's
the same in France. The same in France as well. Like, most people will see a private, a therapist privately, and the range of fees is enormous. It can be from like 10, 20, 30 pounds to see somebody to 200, 250. I've heard of much, much higher rates, you know. So the rates also are really varied. Yeah.
Wow. That is so interesting. So for your practice, is your practice private pay? Do you stay with that model?
Pay.
Okay.
In France, I used to be on a couple of insurance panels that worked with international students. So like American students who would come and study at the University of Paris, for example, the American University, or, you know, just people who were on study abroad programs. That tends to be like an insurance based service. And in the UK, there are insurance policies where, you know, you can get paneled. So I have done that before, but didn't really suit me administratively speaking.
I understand.
And we don't really have as many like billers and people to help us with those systems. It can be quite like strenuous chasing payments and things like that. So I have a private pay practice.
Yeah. It sounds like that's probably ideal, especially navigating all the different countries and all of that you're doing.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that, you know, especially because my clients often move or I'm in a different place, then, you know, I think that works for me. But that's not to say that you couldn't maintain an insurance-based practice if you moved. You could potentially, you know, I have American therapist friends who live in France or in the UK or in other countries, and they maintain their license in the US, work with US-based clients, and still are on insurance panels, and their professional liability insurance is local to them. So, and their tax is local to them. So there are ways of maintaining an insurance-based practice, especially if you come from the US, where it's much more, you know, prevalent.
Right. Yeah, definitely. For those of you that are in insurance-based practices, you know, I've got a virtual address in the state of Virginia. I live in Florida right now. My plan on February 2nd, if y'all have been listening to this podcast, I'm going to be completely a digital nomad. So I'm going to have the virtual mailbox. And we actually found my mom is going to let us use her physical address, because for like our like health insurance and to register our car and everything, we actually have to have a physical address in the United States. So it's been a little bit trying to figure out how to navigate all that. But yeah, it's so interesting. Gosh, all these different countries, navigating all of these things. So you're telling me before we really started recording this episode that you developed a checklist for therapists, American and over in Europe, to navigate the system a little bit. Do you want to talk about the checklist? I definitely want to put it in the show notes so people can download it and get the full thing. But I'm just wondering, are there like some main points on the checklist that you think people would want to know about?
Yeah, so I mean, essentially, it's just going through having a system for every time you either get an inquiry or a situation changes. So either your client goes abroad or you go abroad. So, you know, I always like to remind myself that it's not just about taking new inquiries and doing risk assessments, but it's also about changing, about transitioning between local therapy practice and moving to international practice, and how we hold and take care of our clients with that. So, you know, the things that I will go through, and I'll tidy up my checklist so that it's more for US therapists. Okay. So that it's, you know, more specific to, you know, to people who might be listening.
That'd be wonderful.
Essentially what I talk about is first checking your professional liability insurance, then looking at professional requirements in the location of the therapist and the client. Looking at licensing or regulatory permission if you need to get that, saving all your correspondence, and document everything, because sometimes you won't get a response, you know, but we need to be able to show our attempts. And then the safety stuff. So, you know, safety stuff is about like making sure that we have our client's location and making sure it's up to date at every call, and making sure that we're able to communicate with emergency services if we need to. So I'll talk much more about that in the course that I'm going to give you for your course.
Oh, I'm excited. Yeah, that's going to be so
and
helpful.
I'll make a checklist that's like, you know, specifically for, you know, people who might be working with insurance and things like that. So
Okay, thank you. Yeah, so we'll definitely link to that in the show notes of this episode. So I hope you guys will all go download that if you're even thinking about traveling to another country. It's going to be really helpful. What does GDPR even stand for? Because I don't know.
General Data Protection Regulation.
Okay, good. I've heard it, but I didn't even know what it stood for. Okay, that's good to know. Yeah. And so, and as we were saying before, you have developed sort of a packet, right? Like a quick start for therapists. That's amazing. Yeah. We'll link to that too, if that's okay with you, just to in the show notes.
Yeah, sure. I mean, that's also like often how American therapists get connected with me is because they just want the GDPR template, because you only have to change like 3 or 4 things and then it's done. And then, you know, you don't have to think about anything else. So
somebody would need that packet if, like, let's say I got hooked up with a client that's in Tel Aviv or whatever. I would need to, or is that more like a UK thing? Like with the GDPR, like how many countries does that cover?
GDPR is just for EU countries and the UK. So it still applies to UK following Brexit for now. That might change, but in the UK it's called UK GDPR, and in Europe it's just called GDPR. But it's essentially the same.
Gotcha. Okay.
Yeah. So other countries like Tel Aviv, like Israel, it doesn't apply there. In other countries, they'll have their own kind of privacy regulations. And I think, you know, for therapists who are using an EHR, who are using electronic signature, who have a good payment system, who have a good scheduling system, all of that stuff will already be taken care of. So you might just need like this piece of documentation to add to your welcome pack. But if you are fulfilling all of that anyway and working in telehealth, then usually there's not going to be any like major expectations to change the way that you're practicing.
Gotcha. Okay. Yeah, so this might be a silly question, but if I'm a therapist in the United States and I have a client in France, would I need to do the GDPR paperwork, or is that only if I'm in France and my client is like still in the United States? Like, how does that?
Both. If you or your client are in Europe or in the UK. Yeah. The difference is that if you're based in France, then you need to register with the GDPR regulatory body. If you're based in the UK, you need to register with the Information Commissioner's Office, which is the regulatory body for the UK for GDPR. And then it costs £40 a year but if you're based in the US and you're working with a client in the UK, you don't need to register. So I've always found that slightly unfair that people who are abroad don't need to pay that £40 and that they're not actually technically regulated by the same. But if you want to fulfill the ethical requirements and the privacy requirements, then you would have a GDPR privacy notice for your clients. So, but if you're not in the UK, then you're not in the UK and the ICO, you know, and you're not registered with them. So yeah, but we're supposed to fulfill the requirements, whether it's us or our clients that are based there as well.
Wow. Oh my gosh. This is such great information. Thank you for sharing all this. And I can't wait to watch your course in the traveling therapist course. That's going to be super exciting. It's way more detailed.
I just have to make it shorter. It was too long.
She was telling me earlier, you guys, she was recording it and it's already like, past an hour or 54 minutes already?
I've only done like 12 slides. I'm trying to cram all the information in my brain. Just going to try and space it out a bit.
Oh gosh, that's going to be so helpful to people. I really appreciate you doing that and sharing. I'm trying to think what else I wanted to ask you about all this. I have so many questions, but I'm trying to keep it short so you guys can get on about your day. Let's see. So something that clients ask or other therapists ask a lot is what do your clients think about you traveling? Do you talk to them about it? Do you not even mention it? Just curious how different therapists navigate that with their clients.
Gosh, I love this question. And I don't have a definitive answer. For some clients, I think it's okay. And for some clients, I think it's really difficult when we move location or we tell them we're in a different location. So what I tend to do is I've been working with my clients for more than 2.5 years at this point.
Mm-hmm.
And so I tend to tell them before I move. So like if I'm going to France, I say to them, just a heads up, I'm going to be in France next week, you know?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So my background's going to look different. Or
Nice.
if I'm going to change something in my office, then I'll say, oh, I'm going to add something to the background for next week. So I tend to prepare them a little bit, and then we'll work with that. We'll talk about it in the session. So I'll, mention it in the work and say, does it feel discombobulating? But because I'm between the two places and they're pretty used to it, they've all worked with me for a long time, it's not such a big deal. In the same way that when we're working in an office and if we change a picture or we change rooms or something like that, it can really destabilize, it can really destabilize someone. And so I just try to be like mindful of that and to really think about each individual person. I teach also online therapy practice. And so as part of that, we talk about online setup and taking care of all the different environments, all the different sort of planes of, what I can see and what's behind me and what I can see in the client space and what I can't see and the platform and all this kind of thing. And so some of my grads, they have the same background that they take everywhere. A physical like a tapestry or something, and they take it everywhere, and that provides continuity. Some people will use a Zoom background, but they have like a green screen that goes on the back of their chair. Or some people also talk to me about taking things for the background to each place. So, like for example, I could take my little cats to every location.
Your little kitties everywhere.
Like a little plant or something like that. So that's something that we talk about a lot and that we think about is like, how do we provide continuity when we're not in the same location? And sometimes that might involve talking about it, and sometimes it might involve just creating visual continuity. So I don't have like a definitive, answer on that.
Yeah, no, that's so interesting, because another thing you do offer to therapists is it called How to Love Online Therapy? Is that the name of your program?
Learn to Love Online Therapy. Yeah.
Learn to Love Online Therapy. Yes, which
people who don't love it yet.
It's so helpful, though.
I used to not love it at all, and then I figured out, how to, and so but I think setting up our environment so that we're really comfortable really helps. How about you? What have you decided about that?
Yeah, I do share it now because I only have like maybe 10 clients. I'm kind of like you. I've had them for years. They're like kind of easy. Like I used to do like hardcore heavy PTSD clients, and it was just intense work. I used to see like 8 clients a day, but I've really stepped that back because I've got these, like the side hustles we call them, which have actually become my main hustle a little bit more, teaching therapists about billing insurance and traveling and all of that. So the clients I have now, they pretty much all know, but it was definitely an interesting process. Like when I went from brick and mortar to online, that was a transition. And then there were a couple when I moved from Virginia, even though we'd been online for some time, when I actually told them I was moving out of the state, there was like a lot of grief, because I guess it still felt like we could kind of see each other if we wanted to, kind of thing. But me being out of the state, like moving all the way to Florida from Virginia, there were a couple of clients that took it pretty hard, and we had to process that. It was a grieving process, and it didn't occur to me because I was so excited. It was like, and I'm going to be moving, but we're still going to keep our same schedule and our appointments. And a couple of them, they had a hard time with it. But now it's fine. We've worked through all that, and they're the same clients. I haven't had a new client in probably almost 2 years now. So everybody knows, and now they just sort of say like, if my background changes, they're like, "Where are you today, Kim?" And I'll be like, "I'm in California. It's like 6 a.m. here." So we kind of chat a little bit about it. And, I have clients with trauma who have a lot of anxiety around like traveling and leaving and not having their safe space. So, it opens up a lot of good therapeutic conversations with them too. So I'm okay with it. I know some therapists don't want to mention it at all, which is also fine. But that's where I am with it.
Yeah. I mean, I talk about that as well, like that, whether we name it or we don't name it, like it's still in the work, so how we choose to work with it is important, and we have to adapt that to like every call, every situation, also how we're feeling as well. We may or may not be in a position where we feel up to processing that and supporting someone with it, and might be going through our own grief. We might be going through our own our own kind of adaptation to new places. And so yeah, I think it's actually super complicated and really very specific to each person. Yeah.
Yeah, it definitely is. Well, for those of you out there that are just getting used to the online thing, I know we've all been thrown into it with COVID, but I've heard excellent things about your course and that it really helps people ease into it. Yeah, that people that maybe are just like dying to get back in the brick and mortar but can't because of COVID or whatever else. I've heard it's an excellent course, so I'll put that in the show notes too. I think it's closed. Yeah, I think it's closed right now, but there's a wait list if people want to join, right?
Yeah, I'm actually just only going to do one run this like in 2022, and then I'm going to concentrate on supporting my grads and just helping people with this, like doing little bits of coaching, supporting people with like moving their practices and stuff like that. But and then like maybe bringing some new clients in. I'm kind of excited, about that as well. That could be fun.
Yes.
So yeah, just I think I for the last few years I've like really rolled out that course and done it like really intensively, and I think because there's like a partner practice, experiential practice in it, and it's like very it's very intensive, but it's really for people who like don't feel confident. And I feel like so many people have been thrown into this, as you said, and so many people have a lot of experience with it. So I feel like I can just like reduce the amount of launches that I go through.
Yes, I understand that completely. Okay. Well, I'm aware of the time because I booked these podcast episodes back to back. So I hate to have to end this because this is so informative. I have so many questions for you. I cannot wait for your contribution to the Traveling Therapist course. I think it's going to be so amazing and helpful because I know for me, like I pretty much avoid Europe, as far as like I'm going to work when I'm there. I have a few times, but I really, didn't know what I was doing. I just kind of like saw some clients, which, I probably shouldn't admit that, but it's true. So we need people like you to help guide us. So I really appreciate it.
Yeah. And also I just want to remind people, like when I'm talking through like check this and check this and check this and check this, we're really talking about doing one afternoon of admin, checking this stuff, getting it in place, and then being able to maintain your income and work however you want to work. Like I know I make it sound like a lot of steps, but it's not like you don't have to retrain or anything like that.
Yes.
It's just a little bit of admin so that everybody feels comfortable.
Yes, and having a checklist like yours makes it super simple, which is amazing.
Absolutely.
Thank you for putting that together. Yes.
That's okay.
Yes. Well, thank you so much. And as I said before, I'm going to put all this great information in the show notes so you guys can reach out to Tamara if you'd like. You also have a Facebook group, right? What is the name of your Facebook group? We're giggling because she's had a little trouble with Facebook lately, but she does have a group.
I have a couple of groups. I'm the admin of the Addiction Therapist group and also the Practice Pod, which is a community for therapists, and it tends to be people in the UK or American therapists who want to practice in the UK. But yeah, I'm feeling like I have like a lot of trepidation around those Facebook groups at the moment because I've been locked out recently of Facebook. So it's a little bit up in the air what's going to happen with my groups.
Oh my gosh. Yes. But either way, you can reach out to her through the show notes. And thank you so much. And you guys, she's like a wealth of resources. So reach out to her if you have questions or need help around this stuff.
Thank you so much. Thanks for having me. And I always feel like when I go on a podcast, I've got like 20 questions that I want to ask you as well. So
yeah.
if you ever want someone to interview you for your podcast,
okay. That's a good idea.
But if you ever want someone to come and interview you about your travel, then let me know because I've also got questions for you.
I would love that. Oh my gosh, podcast takeover.
Yeah, it would be so fun.
Oh my gosh, I'm totally going to do that. I'm going to take you up on that.
Cool.
Thank you.
Okay, thanks.
Okay, bye-bye. Thank you so much for listening to the Traveling Therapist podcast. For show notes, links, and downloads, head over to thetravelingtherapist.com, where you'll be able to learn more about my journey, the courses I've created for you, and other exciting resources to make your dreams become a reality. If you've enjoyed this episode, please share with your traveling therapist friends, subscribe to the podcast, and if you loved this episode, please leave a review.